Hi everyone and welcome. We're just waiting for a little more time as students are currently in the office hour. We'll begin shortly. Thank you for being here. So hi everyone, welcome to our PPCR talk today. We're really honored to have Natascha Silva Sandy as our honored speaker. Some students and PPCR alumni has asked about how could they do the residency and fellowship training in Canada. And we're really happy to have Natascha Silva that besides being the site director of the Toronto International site of PPCR, she's also doing her fellowship and residency, her fellowship training in pediatric gastroenterology, hepatology, and nutrition. She's also she was trained in University of Sao Paulo, and then she did the fellowship of gastroenterology in pediatrics also there, and then moved to Canada. And now we're really honored to have her. She did PPCR last year, and she's our invited speaker today. So Natascha, you may begin. I will stop sharing, and thank you so much for your time and for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Alma, for your kind introduction, and thank you, Professor Freni and Alma, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today. So hopefully you guys are seeing my presentation now.
Yes, we
Okay, sorry. Okay, I think we're good to go now. So thank you so much. I'll make just a tiny correction, Alma. I did my pediatric training at University of Campinas, but my pediatrics and my medical degree was at University of São Paulo, like you said. So today I'm here to talk about fellowship and residency application in Canada. I'm going to talk a little bit about the requirements and the process and what are the challenges and opportunities that we face here. So I have two disclosures mainly. I must say that I'm a little bit biased on my experience for sure, right? I'm here at University of Toronto, and I have only done, I'm only doing my fellowship here. I haven't done residency here in Canada. I do talk with a lot of people that are doing the residency here, and there are many Brazilians in the Brazilian community that I know that have done their training here. So a little bit of my experience also reflects kind of that snowball sample of people that I know and that are in among my relationships here. And in some matters, there's a component of a personal opinion, right? And this by no way reflects like an official opinion from University of Toronto. It's not official from the residency process or anything. So I'll start from the beginning. And I guess the very first important point is that residency has a very different process of application than a clinical or a research fellowship. So the very first point would be that, because for residency, as we will talk about, you guys need to validate your medical diploma, while for a fellowship here in Canada, it's not mandatory. And I'm sure that everyone here knows, but there is a significant difference between a clinical and a research fellow. A research fellow can be a way of getting to know people and finding your way around and potentially actually getting a position in a clinical fellow, but it's absolutely not mandatory. And it's also something that I did not do. And I would suggest, I know that there are many people here from different countries, so I think it's important for you guys to make sure that you should understand that the requirements are the same as in the countries that you guys are coming from, and maybe it's not specifically the same type of training. And I'll give an example. As Alma said, I'm doing my training in pediatric gastroenterology here. And in Canada, as part of that training, the same is true for the US, I need to learn how to do endoscopies and colonoscopies. And that's not the case in Brazil, for example. So in Brazil, you first do your PGI training, and then endoscopy is a later and separate training process. So Alma, I see that there is some information in the chat, and I can't see the chat from my screen. So if there are any questions, please feel free to interrupt or let me know, okay?
Yes, I'm doing that. Thank you.
Okay. So where can you guys find information about it? So this is one thing that I'm definitely going to cover throughout the presentation. So first of all, as I mentioned, the residency is a very different and separate process. So this is the information that I got from the Canadian Resident Matching Service. It's called CARBS, and it's the website where you guys will find all the information that you need. So and this is true for the 2020 match cycle, right? So we have to verify that because the rules may change from one year to another. So for this past cycle, the first thing was you wanted to make sure that you were attending or that you graduated from a medical school that is listed in the Word Directory of medical schools, and you can find the list in this website. So there are two tests that you need to do in order to get into residency here. So first one, it's this National Assessment Collaboration Examination, and this is an OSCE-based examination, basically to show that you know exactly how to take a good history, examine a patient, right? It's really OSCE-based. For specifically because of COVID, for the September 2020 session, they did not cancel because they cannot cancel this test, but the test was being done by verbally describing the physical exam maneuvers rather than actually performing them with the actors to still respect the social distance rules. And the second test that you guys need to do for residency would be the MCC, Medical Council of Canada qualifying exam. That's the part one. The part two is not mandatory to get into residency, but you should be a physician here, then you would have to do part two as well. And then when you're enrolling, you don't necessarily need to have done those tests. You might be just scheduled for those tests, but what they say is that for international medical graduates, it's preferable if you have already passed those tests, because then you would have better chances of actually passing through the process of residency. And for residency specifically, you must be a Canadian citizen or have the permanent resident status in Canada. So first you need to get that permanent resident status, and then you can apply for residency. They make it very clear in their website that the USMLE steps, right, the qualification process that is done in the US is not accepted as a substitute for the Canadian examination. And they do also warn that there is some variation with the eligibility criteria in different provinces in Canada. And then they suggest that you would check for each specific province if there is anything that is different or particular about that place. Oh, sorry. I think I clicked in the wrong area. I apologize. It's directing me to the website. There you go. So this is kind of how the website looks like. It's a very user-friendly website, and you can see you have to create an account. There are very different processes if you're applying for R1 or if you're applying for a medical or pediatric subspecialty. This is mainly for subspecialties, is mainly for Canadian citizens. If you're applying for a fellowship like I didn't use this website. And family medicine and emergency medicine, also you should apply it through this website. So it's basically a central application system that will send out your application to multiple medical schools. And just like the same process as in the US, you need to create an order list based on your preferences. And they say that typically you're competing against other international medical graduates. And in some programs, they might not make that distinction. But what I heard, like informally, is that even when they say you're competing together with everyone else, it's still kind of a competition among other international medical graduates. And one thing that it has been in discussion here in Canada is that we have lots of Canadian citizens that sometimes go abroad for medical education because it's also difficult to get into medical school in Canada. And then if as an international medical graduate, you're also competing with those people, with the Canadian citizens. And because of also payment and funding, they sometimes might get accepted more easily to programs than an international medical graduate. So the fellowship, I must say, is much easier, much simpler. The eligibility, so basically you would check in each fellowship website, and you need to make sure that you fulfill the specific requirements for that specific program or that specific institution. So I'm going to show you guys how you can basically Google and find all that information there. But in general lines, the idea is that you first need to prove that you are a physician. So you would use this website, the physiciansapply.ca, that it's basically a platform that verifies that your diploma is real. You need to prove that you can speak English, and different programs will require that at different points. Some might require that you take a proficiency test before, like while you're applying, and some of them may require if you kind of pass the first I would say CV screen. And you need to also prove that you fulfill whatever other previous specific training requirements that they have. In my specialty, pediatric GI, I needed to prove that I was a pediatrician. And the documents and the work permit, because you get the status of a temporary resident if you come for a fellowship, and this is provided by the institution. So you don't need to have a visa before applying or before coming for a fellowship. You need to have a visa before coming, sorry. You don't need to have a visa before being accepted for a fellowship. After you get accepted, then the university will send those documents to facilitate your visa. So this is the website, the Physician Applies, that I mentioned. So basically it's connected to MCC, and it's, as I mentioned, it just verifies your credentials. They want to make sure that you're not presenting a false diploma, right? And it was not listed in the requirements for residency, but is actually required for residency as well, because it's one of the requirements to take those tests that I mentioned. So you still need to do this. And one thing to keep in mind is that each document that you verify for this website, you pay the translation, you pay the fee for the documents to be verified. So it can be somewhat of an expensive process. So here was just to kind of give you a nice example of how it's easy to find that information about the specific program. So I just use Google, I type University of Toronto Neurology Fellowship, and then from there, the very first page, the very first result that came up led me to the University of Toronto Neurology Fellowship Program information. And there you can see that you easily can find all that information related to clinical and research fellowship. And then in clinical fellowship, there's a list of all the types of fellowship that are offered in that division. And then once you choose a random one, here in the example I chose epilepsy, you will find a clear description of who is the supervisor, how long the programs last, when you're expected to start, and the description of the program to make sure that we will also achieve your educational goals with that. And they have the email of the person that you should connect with. This email is going to be either the email of a staff, the training program director, or the email of a secretary, an administrative person. And these people, they're absolutely really used to receive emails and to answer questions and doubts about the application process, about the program themselves. So if you're unsure, or if you're unsure you're a good candidate, if you want to inquire about anything, this person is the person to go to, and their email information is there exactly because they will answer all your questions. And it's just taking a closer look, right? So it says here it's a fellowship supervisor. So this person that is listed specifically in the epilepsy program, it's a staff. And the very first words of courage that I want to give whoever is listening and is potentially thinking about applying is that don't believe in everything that you hear or you read. Don't even believe in me. Go there and check by yourselves. But the main point is that, first of all, they talk a lot about older people or older graduates, or experience can be really something that play in your favor. So I have many colleagues here that are more experienced, that already worked as a staff at their home institutions, and this is absolutely not a problem. As long as you show that there's a good reason why you want to do a fellowship or why you want to redo your residency, they will accept you, and they think that more experienced people are good candidates. The other thing that is not true is that there's no funding or salary for international fellows. So residency, absolutely no questions, right? All residents have a normal salary. If you're chosen even as an international medical graduate, the salary, it comes from the same place. It's absolutely the same. What happens for funding or salary for international fellows is that it's a little bit more competitive as it would be expected. They do also encourage some people, if some people would get fundings from the countries that they're coming from, then that's absolutely better for them. But they do pay the salary of many, many fellowships. And both me and my husband, we are paid by the university. We don't have fundings from Brazil. And the other thing that we already covered, you do not need to validate your diploma for a fellowship, right? For residency, as I showed to you, you need to take those tests and you need to have the medical diploma validation process done. Um, you don't need to know people. You don't need to have been an observer in the division. You don't need to have a connection. These are things that are absolutely not true. Um, if you guys are thinking about how you're going to spend your time and your money to get to the goal of coming for residency or for a fellowship, I would say it's better to invest money and time in your CV rather than like coming for an observer, for example. That won't necessarily open you any doors. Um, Getting your CV stronger, that for sure will have a better effect. I actually didn't know anyone in my division. One of the staff that worked back home with me knew someone here, and she actually emailed that person here, and the answer was basically, well, for the fellowship application you need to contact, and then the name of the admin person that deals with all the fellowship applications. So there's no shortcut, right? You have to go through the same process as everyone, no matter who you know. um, the other things that are relative truths are about recommendation letters. So for residency, some programs will, I would say the majority of programs will require that you have a Canadian recommendation letter, and that might be more difficult to get. But for fellowships, your letters don't necessarily have to be Canadian, and they don't necessarily even have to be in your field, right? So I applied with 3 letters of recommendation because that was what my program required. And all those letters were Brazilian, and 2 of them were in my field, and 1 of them was not. They if they know that they're getting someone in a process that does not include a test, correct? They're basically that they have to believe on what other people say about the person that is applying. So one of the things, there are many articles on how to write a good recommendation letter, on what is a good recommendation letter. So they want to make sure that the person who is writing know you and know you well. So they want to know for how long, in what situation you have worked with that person, and what were the good things about you when you guys worked together. And to one of the points that I was discussing with the previous training program director in my program, they want to kind of get a sense of the person, right? Instead of just using characteristics or qualifications, if someone writes a story with a good example in a situation that you act very well, that's really positive, and they like to see those kind of things. Another relative truth is about the internal protectionism, right? In regards to the trainee or the resident that was there before. So, of course, if there is someone that already works in that institution and has shown that he or she is a good hard worker, it's smart, it's bright, get things done, of course that person has better chances. I'm not sure that this is a protectionism. It's basically choosing a good candidate and someone that you know well, right? Better than having someone writing good things about you is to choose someone that has already been there, has already shown good work. But I must also say that I know residents that have done their training at University of Toronto, have done their training at CTs, and were not chosen for a fellowship there. So it plays in their favor, but it also can play against them. Basically, you need to be good, you need to show good work, otherwise it really doesn't matter where you come from. In regards to research, one of the things that people ask me is whether, like, how much have I published before coming in here, if I have done lots of research. So, of course, if you're going to a very research-driven and academic institution, it goes well on your CV if you have done some research. In my case, I've had participated before in a year of research abroad. So, but I didn't have like many results from that. It was just an experience as a medical student. I haven't really published anything in my field before I came here. I did publish 2 papers at first author in urology. It has absolutely no relation with PGI, and other 2 papers as a contributing author. But I do think it helps a little bit. It's not mandatory. So I have many of my colleagues that haven't really published any research before they got into their fellowship, and they also got the same position. I also think it depends a little bit on luck, right? If that specific year that you're applying, there are many people that have a really strong research background, then in that case, it's a little bit more critical that you have at least done something. They want to know that you know the basics. They want to know that if you're doing something, you don't need to be supervised in every step of the way. And in that sense, I think if you have done the course, even if you haven't really published anything, by proving them that you have formal education, that you participated in this structured research course, it plays in your favor. And one thing that I must tell you that it's not true is that I don't believe that with the current pandemics, international candidates are in disadvantage. Throughout this whole process, the interviews had continue to take place here. We just started an academic year, right? Because North America, the academic year starts in July. And all the new 14 fellows that came were international fellows. They were a little bit late. They had to self-isolate and everything, but they still got here and they were still interviewing everyone. I think that Canadian is like a very Canada is a very like politically correct place, and I don't think they would consider that as something against a candidate, regardless if you're coming from a place where COVID is hitting really high, right? It honestly, I don't believe it really matters. And a good example about this in specific, I'm not sure if you guys will be aware, but in 2019, there was a big diplomatic crisis between Canada and Saudi Arabia. It was like a very sensitive subject, something on Twitter that was interpreted in the wrong way, but the thing like took big proportions to the point that all the Saudi physicians stopped working, and were actually, there was a discussion that they were actually going back home. We have like plenty of Saudi trainees here. And after a few weeks, the issue kind of resolved. And then I honestly thought to myself, well, that's not going to fly well for people that come from Saudi Arabia next year, right, in 2020. And that was absolutely not the case. Like, still people were accepted the same way. Things are working absolutely in the same fashion as before, as nothing has happened, nothing has took place. So as I was telling you guys about the fellowship application, all the specifics on the process will be delineated in their website. And here I put the example of my program. So they're explaining here that you should send a personal letter and a CV to start, and that's how they do their initial triage. And then after that, if they're interested, they will invite you to send a full application. So many programs will work in that fashion. First, they have a screening process of candidates, and you only like fulfill a full application if you pass this initial screening, but some of them will require you to send all the documents right away. So it's really different from one division to another. Like even within the same hospital, one division will do something and a different division will do something different. So for those of you that are planning to prepare yourselves and go for it, so these are my tips that I would suggest you guys for the preparation. So first of all, define a goal. It doesn't have to be one, right? It can be multiple institutions. So exactly where do you want to apply? Make sure that you check all the requirements that specific division or that specific university has, and you can try to build up a little bit of a CV. And I should remind you guys that with one of the good side of this pandemics, if there is any, is that we have been having lots and lots of online conferences, and big international conferences are happening online, which make them much cheaper to participate, and many of them are accepting abstracts. So this is a good opportunity to get some research published in the annual of a conference, and getting your abstract out there, or maybe potentially even having someone that is important to read your abstract, and then by this way build a connection. Um, and as I kind of told you guys when I was mentioning the Physicians Apply website, keep in mind that you might spend some money with this process between proving the veracity of your diploma and between taking an English proficiency examination. This all involves some costs. Um, and as I already kind of mentioned, you don't need to have previous contact with the division or institution, so this is not a mandatory thing. And the last point in preparing would be make sure that you understand exactly what your specialty does in Canada, because it might not be the same that it does in Argentina or in Chile um, or in Saudi Arabia or whatever you guys are coming from, because there is that variation, and you want to make sure that if you're coming for a training that will fulfill all your educational goals. And the best way to do so, I think it would be either directly inquiring that person whose email is there, or talking to someone that has already done the training abroad or in that specific institution. And where does PPCR fits, or where does PPCR helps? So as I mentioned, it's a formal and structured education and research. So if you're applying for a very academic program, then I would suggest you to find a way to put that in your intention letter, that you have done this training before, that you have taken this step towards your education in clinical research, that you have that specific interest, and in whatever program you guys are applying to, you would have an opportunity to put that learning in action, right? So it does provide you good basis both for research work and for manuscript writing. I don't have to tell you guys that you guys are seeing that in practice. And for me specifically, after doing the first year, like by taking a teaching assistant position, that for sure puts me in a good way of telling that I took a leadership position, right? That's really well perceived, and they really look into people that have taken leadership positions in their past. So for the selection and the interview, what they want is to make sure that you will succeed in the program, but also you will add something to the program. So it's kind of a bilateral fit, that it will be a good combination, a good match. And very, very important step for this is to make sure that you know the program, right? To make sure that you know what's their mission, what are their goals, who graduated from that program, who are the staff that currently work there, what are their research interests, and all that information is online. It's absolutely different. You don't have to memorize. It's something that you might read just before you take the interview, but you want to make sure that you show them that you know, and that you're going for the right reasons, and that you will fit, that you share those values. I must say that in some years, although the number of positions is typically stated in their website, that number of positions may change. And the thing that may happen is that they will take, for example, a candidate for one clinical fellowship and then to do a different clinical fellowship in the following year. So in case that specific position was just for one person, it might be taken in the next year. And if that's the case, they will for sure be clear about it. They will, once you write them and tell your intention to apply for a specific position in a specific year, they will tell you that that position is not available for that year and suggest that you apply in a different year. Then the applications, they take place approximately 18 months, 12 to 18 months before they start up the program. And I think with the current pandemics, it's never too early to start applying. Like if you write too early, they will just tell you when they expect you to send your full documentation, but it's never a problem, right? It will always play in your favor. And at least we'll be showing them that you're a person that plans things ahead. So the interview could be online versus in person. And in the past, they would encourage in-person interviews, but currently they're all happening online. And they may have different models for that. So they may schedule you to meet different staffs at different time of the day, or they may schedule you to meet and talk to 5 staffs in the same day. So now let's talk a little bit about the during, right? The being here and how that can be challenging and what are the difficulties that one might face. Um, so of course there is an adaptation, right? So this is a health system that is completely different than the health system that I had back home. English is not my first language, and even though I've lived abroad before, even though I have done a year of research when I was still in medical school, it's still a challenge. You still feel like you're not speaking your first language, and sometimes I guess when I finally felt that I was okay, you know, maybe after 3 months of working and say no, now I think I'm good, then you go to a different service. For example, you go and do consults, and then you're consulting on a child from that's not from your division. I'm consulting in cardiology, and there are all these acronyms in cardiology that I did not know, right? After I learned all the acronyms in GI, then you're faced with a different challenge. There's also the challenge of being away from family, being in a different culture. So there's subtleties about the culture, about the way that things are said or are not said, and that these are all things that you learn with some time. For me, there's a drastic climate change. So I come from Brazil, that it's sunny and the winter is 1 or 2 weeks per year. And here, where it's very cold and suddenly the winter lasts 4 to 6 months and it's very extreme. So that can also be something quite challenging, I would say. And it's overall a different work and teaching environment, and that can be something good, but it's also something that you need to get used to. And I think for those that are thinking about coming for a fellowship and then going back to their countries, you have to think about professional reinsertion when you come back, about your different reality. Maybe you will have, like me, for sure, I have resources here that when I go back home, those resources won't be available. And a question that I'm always asked is about migration. So in a very short sentence, yes, immigration is a possibility. After doing a clinical fellowship, you can get what we call a limited medical license here, meaning that you can only work as a physician in the specific institution that is hiring you. It does not have to be the same institution where you did your training. But for independent practice, typically you would have to go through the diploma revalidation process. And I would say that for most specialties, you would have to redo your residency, but that's for independent practice, right? If you want to make sure that you can work anywhere or in a private practice, you don't want to be attached to a specific institution. In my division, I would say that 80% of my staff have not done their training here, they're international, and they have a limited license, and that doesn't seem to be a problem for them. And furthermore, I would remind you that sometimes training that is done in one country, specifically in Canada, may be recognized in the US or Australia, and that's something that you can verify in their website. As I told you, don't hear in everything you hear, or don't believe in everything you hear. So there is some formal literature on international medical graduates in Canada. And for those of you that are interested, I recommend that you guys would read. It's definitely more efficient than what I'm sharing, but it's also from different perspectives, and from those organizations' perspective, it's definitely interest. One thing that it's discussed in one of those articles is how international medical graduates are really welcome in Canada, and they do recognize that they don't have enough task force to fulfill all the position and the specialties that they need. However, one thing that it's discussed also in those articles is how more and more Canada is becoming somewhat self-sufficiency. So I think it's in this second article. Yeah, it's in the one that says past, present, and future, that they discuss about how before, in the past, 25% of the international medical graduates that would come for a fellowship would be hired and would stay in Canada. And that number over a few decades has fallen down to 8%. So those spots are getting more difficult to get, for sure. And there are many more other articles. So the keyword that I would use would be international medical graduates in Canada, if you want to read by yourself. And it's impossible to talk about anything these days and not talk about the current pandemics. So my perspective from an international trainee, and I must remind you guys that I'm a pediatrician, right? I work in a pediatric hospital. And as we know, fortunately, children have been relatively spared from this pandemic. So I haven't really seen lots of cases. Like it hasn't really increased my workload in that sense because I'm a pediatrician. But things that were a little bit surprising for me. So the institutions here, they didn't necessarily have a unified approach. So that was funny because I do consults across the street for a different hospital in my program, and the PPE policy in one hospital was one, while across the street it was different. I must say that there was, and there still is, some shortage of personal protective equipment. Here they migrated, I would say, almost in a week for telemedicine and online teaching. It was absolutely really fast. And it's impossible to think that there wasn't some losses in teaching, right, and in education. So for sure, unfortunately, the number of procedures has gone down, the number of patients that are in clinic has gone down. And specifically, University of Toronto did not facilitate volunteering to work in a COVID ward. So basically, if I wanted to volunteer to work in Toronto General, for example, I would have to write a letter for my training program director. I would have to be disconnected from my current fellow, and then I would be a volunteer, still supervised, but a volunteer. But because of all those obstacles, this is not something that people really pursue, right? And what I like the most about my fellowship, so there's a strong focus on articles on evidence-based medicine. And I know that that's something that might not be different from the institutions that you're coming from. But for me, it was at a different level, I would say. One thing that I like a lot about here is the mandatory bond between a staff and the trainees. So the supervisor or the mentor role, it's really taken seriously here. And they do organize scholar overview meetings in which they make sure that we're doing well, right? So in those meetings, we basically present every 6 months what we have done in the past 6 months, what we want to do in the next 6 months, and there's a discussion on career goals. And to some degree, I would say that there's an adaptation of your training to what you want to do in life. And since I started PPCR last March in 2019, these were my achievements. So I've published 3 articles as first author, plus 2 other were accepted in their pending publications. I've been invited to review for good journals in my field, and I'm currently working on 3 research projects. So one systematic review, retrospective multi-center study, and a prospective single-center study. And I received the Canadian Association of Gastroenterology Resident Research Award, which it's good because it's funding and because it also looks very good in my CV. So my conclusions for about residency and fellowship in Canada, it's very possible and very feasible for international medical graduates. The one consideration is that you need to make sure that you learn about your subspecialty because it might not be necessarily the best choice of training. So you need to learn exactly what's the role of your subspecialty in Canada because it might not be the same in your country. And for those of you that are looking at this as a way to migrate, it's a possible way, it's an alternative. And thank you guys for your time and for your attention. If you have any specific questions, you can email me either via Gmail or via my PPCR email, and I'm available for any questions that you might have. You're on mute, Alma.
Thank you, Natascha, for this great presentation. It was really amazing. You went over the details. And as I said before, we're really honored to have you today. We have one question in the YouTube channel. It is from Alonso, and he's asking if a Mexican student can apply to residency in Canada.
Yes, as long as your university is listed in that Word Directory university that's in the website of the Canadian Match Program, you can. But the first requirement is to make sure that your university is listed in that specific directory.
Great, thank you. And then our participants right now, we're congratulating you for the award and your achievement that you present. And we're also happy to have you here for that. And then Damian is asking, are there any other opportunities to do research fellows at the University of Toronto?
Yes, I would say that most of the divisions at University of Toronto, they offer research fellowships, and research fellows are absolutely really welcome. The same way that I kind of showed you how to Google and look for a specific fellowship in one division, that would be how I would look for it. But they take lots of research fellows. They also accept fellows for specific labs. For example, if there's someone in your area that you know has a big lab at University of Toronto, you might consider just contacting that person directly, especially if you have a PhD or something. They take postdocs. They have more opportunities than the one that are listed there. One thing that culturally I wasn't really used to, but here it's a big important reality, they answer emails, right? You can find anyone emails online, and they are used to receive those emails inquiring about positions, inquiring about the possibility to work together. So if there's someone that you look up to that you would like to work with, just go ahead and write a short email. The worst case scenario, they won't reply, but I would say the majority of people, you should expect a response.
Great, thank you, Natascha. And then we have a question from Javier. Do we need to get the permanent residency? I believe he's talking about living in Canada.
So for the residency, you need to be a permanent resident or a Canadian citizen. For a fellowship, the university will provide you the temporary residency, the work permit, right? So first, for fellowship, first you get accepted, and then the university gives you the document that you need to get your work permit.
Great, thank you for that information. And then Gabriel, who's a TA, also a senior TA in the program right now, he's asking, do you have any knowledge or differences with surgical fellowships?
Not specifically, I would say, but the reason why I mentioned those differences, for example, as a PGI person that I am, at my university back home, University of Campinas, I learned how to do liver biopsies, right? And here, liver biopsies is something that falls into the category of the interventional radiology. So I don't think that like the major procedures in your area would be different. I don't know exactly what's your subspecialty, but some of them, I would say that the minor things, or these are probably things that you may know that might follow into one or the other person. For example, I would say that surgical fellowship, they don't really do lines, and that's something that in Brazil, for instance, I know that for sure that I would have no problem with the no doubts in my heart that a surgeon knows how to insert a central line, right? But that's not specifically a training that a surgeon will have here, at least not at University of Toronto. And it might be different in different institutions. So that's something, if you're concerned about a specific thing, you can definitely inquire the either the admin or the training program director about that. And they will, during the interviews, they will want to listen to those questions or to those concerns, because they don't want just to accept you, right? They want to make sure that you will thrive, and they want to make sure that you will get the training that you want to get. And even if something is not done here, they might work around it. For example, I had a discussion about gastrostomies, because gastrostomies is the same thing here. GI people don't put gastrostomies via endoscopy here in Canada. But I know that when I go back in Brazil, if I do endoscopies, one of the expectations is that I know how to do it. So this was a discussion that I had with my training program director, and she looked into me actually going in a different hospital and learning from an adult physician, right? So they can work around it.
Great. That's a great opportunity. Awesome, Natasha. And then Pablo is asking, he's saying, congrats for the talk. And I would like to know if you know about some master degree in clinical research in Canada. We heard a lot about United States, but we don't know how it's in Canada.
So I know the University of Toronto has a really strong clinical epidemiology program here. It's very competitive. And I only heard great things about it. One of the things that I should say is that I know that it's expensive, and it's more expensive for international trainees than for Canadian citizens. The same thing doesn't hold true for PhDs for some reason. So that's specifically to a master. You can apply directly, like from wherever you're from, for a master here at University of Toronto. But I would say your chances are lower as if you were here and you've done clinical research fellowship before. So I would say that the easiest way, at least at University of Toronto, in that specific program, would be coming for a research fellowship, getting a supervisor, getting a project somewhat organized, and then you would apply for a master. I know that University of Montreal has different opportunities, and I know that many people get accepted directly, but I don't really know how University of Montreal work in that sense.
So he's asking to what are the name of the universities? But yeah, Montreal and
so there is McGill. There is also still in Ontario. There is Queen's University. There is, oh my God, I can't remember the name. It will come soon. In Montreal, there is McGill. In Ontario, there is Queen's University, McMaster University. That was the name that I couldn't remember. In Vancouver, there is British Columbia University that is also very strong. There's Calgary University that is strong as well. There is Saskatoon University. It's a little bit more north and a little bit colder even than Toronto and Vancouver. But these are all good universities. And I'm sure there are more that I don't know about. University of Alberta. These are the ones that I can easily remember.
so great. Thank you, Natasha. Yes, there are many strong universities that have a strong academic background and they are really working a lot in research. We have seen it that we can share with that Pablo. We can look for it and share with you.
Yeah.
And then So basically that. Okay, then Augusto is asking, he's a current student of PPCR. He's asking, do you personally plan to stay in Canada or go back to Brazil? Do you
I'm
think?
going back. I'm crazy about Brazil. It's messy, but I belong there. So I'm going back July next year.
Okay, so, and then the other question was, do you think it is a disadvantage to stay without a full license in Canada? I believe he's
I
referring.
honestly, I think if you stay at a university, for example, so people get jobs at University of Toronto. It's not something like if you get a job, it doesn't really tell you that you're staying there. So basically, the same way that they have progress meetings with fellow, they have progress meetings with staff. They want to make sure that because there's lots of protected time for research, they want to make sure that you're productive. So I would say that in a year, if you haven't really been productive, then there's a chance that they won't renew your contract, that you won't stay there. But as I mentioned, more than 80% of the staff in my division, they have a limited license, and they have absolutely no problem maintaining their license and keeping their jobs at University of Toronto. So I think as long as you do a good work, it shouldn't be a problem.
Yes, I agree. You always have to show passion and do your best, and everything will come easily to you, even though you have to work hard.
So
And
Javier is asking about the permanent residency. Oh, maybe that's an old question. So fellows can apply for the permanent resident status, right? This is not what you get right away. What you get right away is the temporary status, but you can apply. It's just that you have to fulfill other criteria, and to be honest, I wouldn't know for sure what are those other criteria, because this is not something that I've looked into, because I don't plan to get a permanent residency status here.
yes, and then we have a new question from Damian. He's asking for the research fellowship. Should we email a professor we're interested in working with or attach our CV, or do you have any other tips?
So my tip would be to keep an initial contact very brief, right? The thing is, those people are used to respond to lots of email, but they also get a lots of emails, like 200. It's crazy the amount of emails that we get here. Even someone who is not important as me, like if I don't check my emails for 2 hours, there are 34 emails, from my division. So I can only imagine that this problem is way worse for a training program director or an important scientist. So in the very initial contact, I would be very short to keep their attention span. So I would say, hello, my name is blah. I'm interested in this or that, and then mention only one or two things about yourself, and not send a CV right away, because I don't think they would necessarily screen your CV right away. And that might look like you're pushing something. Um, but then they might redirect you, right? If this is not how they do it, the initial screening, they might redirect you for either an administrative person or the right person that you should be sending your CV. But both ways work. I would, if you're looking for a research fellowship, go in the division website and see what are the opportunities there and start from there. But if there is a specific person, I absolutely don't see a problem in emailing that person. If you don't get a response, you just switch to the administrative person, or the supervisor that is listed there in the website.
Great, thank you, Natasha. And then that's the only one. Any other question? Oh, thank you so much, and congrats on the prize. He's saying
Thank you. Thank you.
it's really nice.
Yeah,
And
I
then,
was really happy about it, especially because being from pediatrics and competing against adult medicine, I don't think we always take the fair share. So I was really, really proud of it, because it was among all gastroenterology residents in Canada.
yes, no, it's a great achievement. It's a great achievement. We're sure. And just that. So, okay, now Ellie is asking, Ellie Pichardo from Dominican Republic. She's a TA right now too. When applying for a residency program in Canada, since we have to get a permanent resident status from the country, do you think it will be better to get a fellow in something like research in the meantime? We're waiting for the permanent residency status.
I think that's a very smart way of doing it, Ellie, because, I mean, you will get your CV stronger, you will get to know people. When you're interviewing in that institution, you would be in advantage, and then you can work in fulfilling the criteria to get your permanent, because you need to for residency specifically, you need to sort out the visa part before you apply, right? And also you might have the chance of studying to take those tests while you're here doing your research.
So she's saying, awesome, thank you. And then Julio asked a question from Mexico. He's saying, does a master degree in Canada will help to enter the resident program?
Yes, for sure, right? It's something that is very positive. So one of my co-fellows here, he actually had a master and a PhD before doing his residency. He was absolutely a very strong candidate. He's also a great person. There are many other good things about him, but it's something that basically stands out, right? Among many, many candidates, someone that has a master's for sure stands out.
Yes, completely agree. If you have the opportunity to do it, do it. And then, can I do a clinical fellowship in Canada, or is it the same path as a research fellowship?
Um, so I'm not sure I understand the question. So I mean, there are different things, right? But I think you find the information in the same websites. And for both clinical and research fellowship, you don't need to have your diploma validated, as I explained, just to prove that you in fact are a physician and you in fact fulfill the requirements that that specific subspecialty has.
Yes. And then, so he's saying thank you to you.
Okay.
Anyone else you want to ask something, you're also more than welcome to open your mics and ask directly to Natasha, and or you can type your questions here. Let's see. I will check again YouTube if we have one more there. No, just that one. Okay. Um,
So no more questions. I spoke a lot.
no, but it's great, and thank you. I am sure that you have cleared a lot of doubts. We have many alumni and current students who are thinking about this possibility, and we know that Canada is have a strong background in academic and of
It's
course.
also a very welcoming place, I would say. As an international trainee, you guys realize I have a strong accent. It was never a problem. One thing that I would say, so back in Brazil, so my father is from Bolivia, right? He has an accent, like he speaks Portuguese with an accent. I think, for instance, like the Brazilian patient doesn't really like the physician with an accent. Here, basically 90% of the physicians will have an accent. It can be from German, it can be from England, it can be from Brazil, from Russia, they absolutely don't mind. It's something that they expected. A great percentage of physicians are international, and that's something that is really well taken.
Yes, it's true. It's a really open country, and the cultural is the people is really easy and really educated and polite. So
Absolutely. They're so polite. It's amazing. It's a great environment to work.
and welcoming, yes. And then we got one more question from Gabriel, and he's asking if the competitiveness of the payment enough for living in Canada for a fellowship.
You mean the salary is enough to survive? Let's put it that way. Yeah, it is. It's a little bit, for example, I was a resident in Brazil, right? So as a Brazilian resident, I would take shifts in other places to basically complete my income. And here it's not a lot of money, but I would say it's enough, especially if you have a second person also bringing income to your household. But even if you don't, for example, Toronto specifically, everyone discussed that it's relatively an expensive city to live. And I live, for instance, downtown, but it's not, there's no luxury in my house, but it is enough to live, I would say, well, maybe if you have 2 or 3 kids and you need to hire a nanny, it might be a little bit more difficult. But if you're 2 adults, I would say, for example, one salary, one fellow salary would even be enough to live okay, and two, you would live, I would say, well, with two fellow salary.
Great. Thank you, Natasha, for sharing that. I believe maybe he was talking about comparing it to United States or things like that. Here
Oh,
in
compared to United States, I honestly don't know much about the salary in the United States to be
ranges,
completely.
according to the fellowship, some in the first year it could be 55 until 7,000 a year, but it depends on the fellowship and the program that you're applying to, and the
So I
city.
would say that the general rule of thumb here, and I learned that because it's something that is discussed, is that the minimum you should receive for a fellowship would be 55K per year, but most of the programs will pay 75.
Yeah, so it's a little higher.
Yeah.
It
But
depends.
there's a rule about the minimum. I think it may vary by province as well, because they showed me this calculation, like that living in Toronto would cost this and this and this. So the minimal payment that I would have would be 55. It might be different if you're talking about British Columbia or Montreal. So that can be something that is different in each province.
Yes, in United States it depends on the city and the program. Some programs pay higher than the other ones if they are
And then
private.
also in the year of training, so there's some difference in the year of training as well. And if you're doing more clinical work, you get more payment, and if you're doing more research work, you might get less payment, right? And there are stipends for calls, which I'm not sure if that's something that is usual in the US. I think so, right? It's not something that we have in South America, at least not in Brazil. I wouldn't say South America because I don't know about other countries.
Yes, if you're called for extra chief or they have to replace someone, actually some programs pay you the next day. Like leaving the hospital, you go to the administration department and they'll give you the check right there after you chief, extra chief that you completed. In some of them, they are like that. Javier is asking another question. How do we know if a fellowship comes with a salary?
So it will be written in their website. They might state, for example, in the one example that I showed you, I think it was the epilepsy program at University of Toronto. They say that they have one or two paid spots per year, and that means that they might take more fellows if you come with funding from your country, but that's what they have available to for payment in that year, right? But that's the number. That number can work differently in different years as well, because something that we're not quite used here, there was lots of discussion about salary when I came for my interview. For instance, there are different sources for payment if you're an international medical graduate versus if you're a Canadian citizen. And that's something that the training program director will take into consideration when they're making their decisions about who is getting selected for that year, because they also have to do financial decisions, right? Um, and there's some facilitation, for example, for Canadian citizens, in specifically in pediatrics, because if you're only doing pediatrics, for instance, the training is 4 years. But if you decide to do a subspecialty, you can do only 3 years of training and then apply for the subspecialty. It's kind of the first year of your subspecialty works as your last year of residency. And in that case, their salary is already guaranteed by the Ministry of Health, right? Because were already predicted to pay for those 4 years of training. So different programs will have a different number of the paid positions in different years. It will also depend on how many Canadians are applying that year.
Great. Thank you, Natasha. He's also saying thank you to you, Javier.
You're welcome.
Now, Regina is asking, congratulations on your presentation and all of your accomplishment. Is there a program or a course or book for taking the exams for medical residency?
Yes, there are. I know that there is a specific key bank for people that want to prepare for residency. Let me see if I can check the name real quickly, because someone sent me that maybe a few days ago. I have it here in my cell phone. So there's canadakeybank.com. I will type in the chat so you have it. I don't know about books. I know that this specific bank of questions is something that people use a lot. There you go. Any other questions?
No, again. Okay, then Damian added, Professor Fregni saying, excellent talk, Natascha, and great question all. And then,
Thank you, Felipe.
yes. And then we have Damian who's asking, do you think American clinical experience is a good asset for residency application? Or should we also consider looking for clerkships or serverships in Canada?
I think any international experience, it's a good asset, right? As I mentioned, like, I don't think coming for an observership is mandatory. And I also said that I did not come. Like, I haven't really met anyone in my division prior to coming in here. And I honestly think if you're going for a very academic division that is very research focused, I would invest my time and my money in trying to send posters to conference, in trying to get my abstract out, or even trying to get a publication more than necessarily doing a clerk or an observer. Of course, if you have, like, for example, we did receive some observers here that were also interviewing. They can organize that, so you can come for an observer of a month and you can also be interviewed during that month that you were here. It's good exposition. You get to know lots of people. For instance, in my division, where we have divisional rounds every week, where a fellow presents a paper that was recently published, these people that come for observers and that are candidates, they are invited to present, and that's definitely a good chance of making a good impression, right? But as I mentioned, if I would choose something, I would not necessarily choose looking for an observer or a clerk.
Yeah. Great, Natascha. And then in YouTube, now we got like four more questions for you. One is from Maria, sorry, from Mara, and she said, I heard that we need to work for a year in Canada before getting into the residency. Is that true?
Not to the best of my knowledge, to be honest. The thing is that before getting into residency, you need to get a permanent status, right? A permanent resident status. I'm not sure maybe if it's required for that, right? Because as I mentioned, I haven't really looked into getting Canadian citizenship or a permanent status here. But you do need to be here before, because there's no way that you can get a permanent resident status without being in Canada before.
Great, great. Thank you for that. Then we have another question from Roach Lips. He's saying, how can I strengthen my CV if I can enroll in a master program? I'm currently a medical student.
So how can he strengthen his CV if what? Sorry.
I strengthen my CV if I cannot enroll in a medical program. I'm currently a medical student.
So I would say that the best way to strengthen your CV if you're a medical student would be doing research, right? If you already know the area that you're pursuing, then it's better if you can do research in that specific area. But then if you're not sure, even as I mentioned, like I published in neurology before coming to do PGI, and that was still any research would definitely strengthen your CV. And if you it doesn't matter, right? If you publish in a high impact journal, for example, I published in Journal of Urology, that looked really well in my application, right? Because although it was not in pediatric GI, it was still a good journal, so that looks good.
So great. And then we got another question from Hadisa. She's from Nigeria, and she's saying, thank you for your wonderful presentation. Do you have any idea about rotations in oncology or fellowship?
Oncology, radiation oncology?
Yes, radiation oncology.
Yeah,
So,
I know have different programs here. I think there is more than one program. Like, when I showed the example of neurology, basically my idea was also to show you guys that within University of Toronto, they had 3 stroke fellowships programs. So I think the same thing happens for radiation oncology. Specifically in oncology, there are many, many opportunities. There are many oncology hospitals here. So yes, I'm 100% sure that there are programs. I don't know the specifics about them, but I would definitely look for it because I know that you can find them.
Great. And then Rachel is asking, do you know if there is a specific website like CARMS where we can search and compare the duration of the resident programs with United States programs?
I don't know that specific answer, Rach. I would expect that in CARMS you can find the duration of the programs, but I don't know if there is anything comparing different specialties. I think that maybe you might have to click like one by one, but any other specific website, I don't know. I'm sorry.
No, don't worry, it's totally fine. Then David's asking, will you say that Canadian residency citizenships get paid more than international for fellowship?
I
Also,
don't think that they get paid more. Like, I think our salary is somewhat the same. I honestly, it's not something that is broadly discussed. So, because of the rules and like the general guidelines, I wouldn't expect that there would be a big difference. What I meant when I was talking about how the number of Canadian candidates might interfere is just that for specific programs, when they're thinking about where they're going to get their funding for their fellows, it might be easy to find funding for Canadian fellowships because in some way the Ministry of Health kind of facilitates the funding for Canadian trainees, right?
great, thank you. And then we have just thank you. And it's the same question. Maria already posted already on YouTube. And basically that. Any more questions, guys? Please don't be shy. A profit that we have Natascha here with us today. We know that all of you are many people is interested in this possibility, and actually it's a great option for you also.
And again, if you guys later think about anything, you can always email me. I promise to answer.
Great. So on YouTube, they're also saying thanks to you. All the people who are watching their live in Professor Fregni's channel. So
You guys are welcome. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Natascha. Thank you so much for your time. Any final remarks for all the students? I believe there are no more questions today.
I would say that the only remark would be that this is a good place to train. For those of you that, for me, it's easy to say that I want to go back to Brazil. I was joking, right? It's kind of a mess, but I like being there. But it's still a safe place in a sense. And I know that some people, they sometimes think about leaving their country because of other more important political or safety issues. So I think this is an amazing place to live. And if that's the case, I would absolutely encourage you guys to pursue. And as I mentioned, they're very welcoming. I do think you need to look into your subspecialty because, as I mentioned, there are those small differences, and you want to make sure that if you're coming for this, that you would get your educational goals achieved, right? And I think that in many instances, people will say things like, "Oh, you can't go. You're too old, or you haven't done research." So don't believe that. Honestly, with a little bit of luck and a little bit of persistency and some good work, you can definitely get a position.
Great. Great. Thank you, Natascha. Thank you once more for being here today. And thank you all. And the recording will be available at Google Classroom and also on YouTube channel. We have it there. So thank you. Have a nice night. And Professor Fred is also saying thanks to you. He couldn't be here like
Thank you, guys. Thank you again for the invitation.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.